First, they were on.
We will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens.
25% on Mexico and Canada.
Then they were off.
President Trump's tariffs against Canada will now be put on hold.
Then, while the first set of tariffs were paused, Trump threatens a whole new second set of tariffs, and then threatens a third set of tariffs, reciprocal tariffs stacked on top. But eventually, he loops back to the first original tariffs, promising they're definitely coming.
On the tariffs, is there any room left for Canada and Mexico to make a deal before midnight? And should we expect those Chinese tariffs, the extra 10%, to take
No
effect?
room left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow.
And then those tariffs became real until they weren't anymore because they were partially delayed.
We spoke with the big three auto dealers. We are going to give a 1-month exemption on any autos coming through USMCA.
And then a big chunk of what was left of the tariffs was paused again. Here's how Trump justified it.
And I spoke to the president of Mexico, wonderful woman, today, and we helped them out with the problem they were having to do with the tariffs.
I helped them out with a problem they were having, as in the problem he inflicted and then paused, and then re-inflicted and then paused. Are these the actions of a man who knows what he's doing? Maybe not, but maybe. There are two main schools of thought when it comes to how Donald Trump is managing the world's largest economy. Either the pandemonium is planned.
Yeah, I think chaos is a big part of Trump's strategy.
There's a term that applies to what the Trump administration is doing: weaponized uncertainty.
Or
another possibility is Trump just likes the attention, just likes the drama.
I don't think there's a genuine economic strategy behind it.
Let's start with that. The argument that Trump has no coherent plan is supported by the fact that he sometimes has no consistent point of view. Take tariffs, for example.
Canada's a very bad abuser also. Vast numbers of people to come in and fentanyl to come in.
Legally, Trump has justified tariffs by branding the influx of fentanyl from Canada and Mexico a national emergency. But is that really the motivation? Or is it about boosting American manufacturing?
We don't need trees from Canada. We don't need cars from Canada. We don't need energy from Canada. We don't need anything from Canada.
Sometimes it seems to be about the principle.
Subsidizing Canada to the tune of over $100 billion a year.
By the tune of about $200 billion a year.
And other times it seems to be more about power.
I'd like to see Canada become our 51st state.
He feels strongly that it would be very beneficial for the Canadian people to be the 51st state of the United States. They wouldn't be paying for these tariffs.
And what about the occasional lack of a unified message? Trump's own team sometimes seems left in the dark. Like whatever Trump was planning, if he was planning any of it, was never actually discussed out in the open. Take what Trump's Commerce Secretary said earlier this week on Fox News about tariffs against Canada and Mexico.
So I think he's going to work something out with them. It's not going to be a pause, none of that pause stuff, but I think he's going to figure out, you do more, and I'll meet you in the middle some way, and we're going to probably be announcing that tomorrow.
Except this was wrong. 2 days later, Trump did, in fact, issue a significant tariff pause.
We saw this a bit in the first term, but not nearly to this extent. But if you were to put a timeline of promises backtracking, it's just a zigzag pattern.
And this zigzagging isn't necessarily only a communication thing. Sometimes Trump's policies just aren't properly thought out.
President Trump has announced new tariffs on China that removed the de minimis exemption.
On February 1st, Trump issued an executive order that taxed Chinese imports under $800. For years, those imports had been duty-free. But then, 1 week later, Trump completely reversed course because there was no plan for how the US Postal Service was supposed to suddenly process brand new taxes on the mountain of stuff Americans order every day from sites like Temu and Shein. Packages started getting backlogged, so now this order is on hold until they figure it out.
It's the whims of somebody who seems to change his mind as fast as the rest of us change our underwear.
There's the constant drama, impulse control. If you want to make the case that there's a master plan, What is that master plan?
And there are countless examples of this apparent lack of a master plan, because many of the consequences that seem to invariably force Trump to take back what he says are foreseeable. The biggest example of this is how tariffs would affect the auto sector.
I'm afraid for both sides, for my workers, for the workers in the United States, but it's devastating. It'll devastate us.
Car manufacturing supply chains across Canada, the US, and Mexico are highly integrated and interdependent. Millions of parts and vehicles flow between the three countries every year, and economists predicted a 25% tariff would increase the cost to make each vehicle by thousands of dollars.
This industry has been integrated and grown together for decades. You can't unscramble the omelet one morning because you decide, you know what, you want to have a fried egg or a boiled egg. You made the omelet. You can't turn it into eggs over easy.
But it was only after Trump had dangled the threat of tariffs for 2 months and then actually enacted them that he decided, no, wait, I can't do that. I have to hit pause.
It's just a modification, short term, because I didn't want to hurt the American. It would have hurt the American car companies if I did that.
It was predictable to anyone paying attention to the details. I mean, the auto sector is so heavily integrated that, a piece goes back and forth multiple times. You can't build a car under these circumstances.
And the entire time Trump spends changing his mind, there's material harm to American businesses because they don't know which suppliers to use or what prices to charge.
What he's doing is he's creating uncertainty for people and companies that have to make pending investment decisions or future capital planning.
And consider one of Trump's most prized metrics for success.
Since my election, the stock market has set records.
Everybody's stock has done well since the election.
But nowadays, asked by reporters whether his latest pause on tariffs had anything to do with stock market performance.
Well, no, nothing to do with the market. I'm not even looking at the market.
Because the market has slumped.
Stocks continue to fall today with fears of higher prices and escalating tensions.
He says, I'm not watching the market. I believe that as far as I could throw a Honda Civic, right?
That the one thing he will respond to is when the stock market goes down. The stock market goes down and he changes his mind.
But in the meantime, there is real economic consequences for doing this, for the uncertainty that consumers and producers take.
But let's talk about the second possibility here, which is that Trump knows exactly what he's doing. When you spend some time observing Trump, you start to notice more and more how he very clearly enjoys the persona that he's carved out for himself of being a disruptor. Like when he's naming those countries he believes treat the US unfairly.
The European Union, China, Brazil, India, Mexico and Canada, have you heard of them?
Or when he's waving a pen at those same two economies who depend on the US the most.
They've been in the news lately, haven't they?
Or when he calls the president of Ukraine a dictator and days later jokes that he would never say such a thing.
Mr. President, do you still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
I do think that he thrives on the idea that we're having this conversation right now about what his strategy is here. I think he thrives on the idea that he's unwieldy and nobody really knows what's really going on.
Yes, it's this old paradox of how a bug is sometimes actually a feature. As in, Trump's leadership may not simply be a series of unforced errors, but rather an intentional set of moves designed to throw opponents off balance.
We see a lot of what they call the madman theory, basically make yourself look so unpredictable that your adversaries don't know what to believe about you.
And let's stop to consider who Trump might consider his adversaries. Countries like Canada and Mexico? Yeah, and maybe not just Canada and Mexico.
The United States has been ripped off by virtually every country in the world.
But also, he's increasingly singled out and used incendiary language against those companies that do business with other countries.
Well, a lot of them are globalist countries and companies that won't be doing as well because we're taking back things that have been taken from us many years ago. Basically, you have globalist companies that have been ripping us off.
And I'll explain where I'm going with this. Trump has always been transparent about one thing, that he wants American manufacturing to return to America.
America will be a manufacturing nation once again.
And he's always been clear, tariffs are a way of forcing those companies who would dare to make product outside of the US to relocate, to set up factories, to create jobs, to put America first.
He would, in his heart of hearts, like to have fewer cars built in Canada and Mexico and more cars built in Michigan and like North Carolina.
So what they have to do is build their car plants, frankly, and other things in the United States, in which case they have no tariffs.
And so there's a strategic line you can start to imagine where maybe you never actually have to apply tariffs to anything because maybe the threat is enough.
He's essentially trying to intimidate or provoke some response that he thinks he'll be able to take advantage of.
And if that's the case, the rubber banding, the pendulum brinksmanship starts to make more sense. If he thinks this is the most painless way to get what he wants eventually, that the prospect of perpetual, unending uncertainty is too much to bear. So from industry's point of view, let's just do as Trump wants and move operations to the States.
He's a lot more willing to try things than your average politician. We've seen over the course of the last month and a half, his entire month and a half in office in the second term, that there's just less of a barrier there to trying things. The Republican Party has decided to kind of hand him the keys.
Now, to be both fair and clear, Trump's aggressive style has produced material change globally in a way that we haven't really seen under previous presidents. Just look to Europe as an example, how they're scrambling to shore up mutual defense and defense spending directly because of how Trump treats the NATO alliance. But turning back to tariffs, there are two complications with his strategy. The first is whether what he's demanding is even possible.
You can't move automotive plants in anything less than 5 years. You're gonna have to close a plant, you gotta break the supply lines, you gotta find new supply lines, find a new site, build a new plant, get your multimodal access and your power there, and that's $2.5 billion per plant that you don't have sales against to amortize that cost. These privately owned, publicly traded companies that begged him to pull back from the brink, he's gonna bankrupt them before he gets what he thinks he wants.
But the second problem is that there may be a point at which Trump's adversaries stop riding the roller coaster. Canada seems to want off.
As I always say, you know, you touch a stove once and you get burnt, you don't touch that stove again. The only deal is drop the tariffs.
We're going to ensure that the Americans understand how pissed off we are.
We cannot live as Manitobans with a persistent threat of Donald Trump's tariff tax.
And consider how differently the federal government has responded to this latest pause compared to the first time. After Trump's first pause a month ago, the Prime Minister immediately pulled Canadian counter tariffs off the table. Trade war averted. Whew. But his response this time?
I can confirm that we will continue to be in a trade war that was launched by the United States for the foreseeable future.
Now, the Canadian government has withdrawn a future second wave of tariffs, but has decided to keep its current first wave on $30 billion worth of American goods in effect. And come Monday, which is in a few days from the time I'm recording this, Doug Ford of Ontario seems so far to be holding firm on his threat to jack up the price of electricity sold to Americans by 25%. So if Trump does indeed have a master plan, what comes next?
I don't know. I left my crystal ball in the other room. I'm sorry.
I don't know, and he doesn't know, which makes it very difficult to negotiate. How do you play that game when the rules keep shifting on an hourly, daily, weekly, monthly basis?
But I think we can make at least one prediction, that whether you think Trump is governing by impulse or has calculated his moves, whatever he says publicly has less and less value. Because when he says he's going to do something, maybe he will and maybe he won't. Even signed agreements like trade deals stop being meaningful if the US president can simply decide unilaterally to violate them, or at least threaten to.